So it's not every day, guys, that we are talking about things outside of the clinic itself when it comes to practical work. But today I have a very special guest in somebody who's going to give us a bit more of a deeper dive into a different facet of dentistry. Now, usually when we think about specializing and progressing with our careers, we think about endodontics, orthodontics, but we don't really talk about practice ownership. Now, I take a very special interest in this because that's something that I believe that I would probably work towards in the future. But I've got someone on that's actually a super pro when it comes to all of this area in dentistry, and actually is somebody who's basically a guru when it comes to it. So I'm so happy to introduce you guys to Andy Acton. Andy, if you would like to take it away, give us a bit more of an introduction to yourself, and then I'm going to start interrogating you for the sake of the viewers.
I'm looking forward to the interrogation, and thank you very much indeed for having me. I'm looking forward to it. So, yes, my name is Andy Acton. I'm one of the owners of Frank Taylor and Associates Group, and Frank Taylor Associates, we value and we sell dental practices. So, I've been involved in it's just over £2.5 billion worth of transactions, all in the UK. Been doing what we do since 1988, so it's a really long, well-established business. And we see ourselves very much as part of the UK dental scene. We help people sell, but we also work with the buyer as well. And for us, getting people into practice ownership is a really important thing to do for the future of dentistry, because dentistry is such an important part of society in many reasons, oral health primarily, but just the impact it has on people's confidence and how they feel about their lives. The avenues it opens, the opportunities, you can set the culture, you can work with your team. It's a really good process to go through. So today, hopefully we're going to talk around some of the things that people need to understand and know about if they're thinking about getting into practice ownership, because I'm sure there'll be a lot of students out there and younger dentists who are liking the idea of doing this in the future, but perhaps don't really know where to start.
Exactly that. I think we typically do see kind of in the market when it comes to YouTube and social media and podcasts, everything's kind of geared at people that probably know at least a certain amount in the foundation when it comes to kind of dentistry as a whole and ownership as a whole. So we're going to really kind of strip this back to the bare bones. Hopefully you'll guide us through it. So we'll get through ownership for idiots, let's call it, because I'm definitely one of those. So hopefully we can work through it bit by bit. So let's kind of start from the bare bones of this right at the beginning, right? What does it take first and foremost to become a owner of a practice? Are there any sort of prerequisites to it? Is it only for us, for dentists? Is it for anybody out there in the general public? Give us a rundown of that.
So I think to start with, there's kind of the technical side of what you need to be to own a dental practice. And you have to be a dentist. So you need a GDC number. You can partially own a dental practice and not be a dentist, but the dental partner cannot be in the minority. So you could have parity, you could have a 50-50 partner and your partner being a non-dentist, but the dentist cannot be in minority for good reason, because actually what you want is you want the person who's responsible for delivering the clinical treatment to be somebody who has responsibility and a degree of control over how that business is run. But from a GDC number, that could be a dentist, therapist, hygienist. It doesn't necessarily need to just be a dentist. So that's kind of the technical bit taken care of. So that's kind of your entry requirement into owning a business.
Perfect.
But there's a separate point to this, which is more about do you want to and what sort of person do you think you are and whether you're likely to be successful? Because if you embark on owning a dental practice, if you buy a practice, in the UK at the moment, the average dental practice costs about £850,000 sterling. That's kind of where we're at. So it's not an insignificant sum of money. And a bank will require you to put about a 10% deposit in if you're buying a dental practice. So you need to have about £90,000 for an average dental practice in the UK. That's a lot of money.
Yeah.
If it doesn't work out, you will lose a lot of money. So before you get on that journey of I want to buy a practice, you need to kind of ask yourself and family and friends whether you're the sort of person that appears to have the skills, the drive and the ambition to own a dental practice. Really bad reasons to buy a dental practice, because you hate your job as an associate, not a good reason. You might just be destined to be an associate somewhere else. Because your mates have got a practice, not a good reason. Because in the short term, you think you're going to earn more money, Not a good reason, because you won't. So those aren't good reasons. If you want, the long-term control and the asset and the security, that's good. If you want to design a culture and build a team, that's great. If you want to control the clinical quality and the direction you want to take your dentistry, that's a good reason. If in time you want to perhaps work less clinically but have an income from a business, that's a good reason. But you need to understand why you want to do it. So there's the
Yeah.
technical bit. As a dentist, you can absolutely buy and own a dental practice. But for me, the other part that perhaps doesn't get thought about that much, but is really important, is why do you want to do it? What's the underlying reason? And so many people think it's the cool thing to do. At the
Yeah.
moment, owning businesses, entrepreneurship is all over socials. Everyone's got a side hustle. Everyone's an entrepreneur, but it's not suited to everybody. And if that's you, then great, go for it. But if it's not, you can still be an awesome associate. Being a dentist as an associate is not selling out in any shape or form. You don't have to become a practice owner to feel that you've really achieved something. You could still just be an awesome dentist. And I think that's a really important point, because what I don't want is every young dentist to think there's a natural progression from
Yeah.
qualifying to buying a practice. For those that want to do it, don't get me wrong, we will help, and it's amazing. But it shouldn't be the route that everybody feels they have to go through.
Perfect, perfect. And I mean, you've explained there the why and understanding that, and
Mm.
that's perfect. But when it comes to kind of personality traits, what would you say in your experience have made the best practice owners? Because maybe that's something that we could then, if we kind of got a flavor for it, and we want to get into that. One thing that we can adjust, I guess, in this growth phase is actually our kind of our little attributes and our little characteristics, right?
Yeah.
So what do you think makes a good practice owner? Something that maybe we can start looking at now while we're still students or aspiring dentists or newly qualified people,
Mm.
to help us better be placed to then in the future go into practice management, or sorry, practice ownership.
What I'd say is it's everything that happens where you're not holding a handpiece. So
Right.
what happens at dental school? You spend all your time understanding and learning clinical dentistry, how to, deliver good oral health care, which is of paramount importance as a clinician. But
Mhm.
when you move into business ownership, that doesn't matter, because you would have spent a minimum of 5 years at dental school becoming a good clinician.
Yep.
But as a business owner, you have to be good at lots of things. As a dentist, you have to be excellent at one thing, and that's dentistry. So the mind has to shift in different ways. So you
Right.
go from being excellent at one thing, which is dentistry, to suddenly being able to be good at lots of things. And that's the life of a business owner. So as a business
Brilliant.
owner, you need to be able to understand the psychology of people, which typically we get called as HR. But if you can understand people and work with people and motivate people, that's a great skill. You need to understand leadership and management are two different things. So leadership is around inspiring people, motivating people, getting them to buy into your long-term strategy. Management is making sure that your budget is on target.
Right.
People are doing the right job. Are people, aligned with the business? So it's understanding those differences. So what I'd encourage students or younger dentists to look at is really doubling down on the non-clinical aspects of what they do. So
Ah,
we talk about CPD, and CPD is continuing professional development.
yeah.
And as a dentist, you have to do it year on year, and you have to make sure that you keep it in your log and record it. The truth is, for my part, CPD isn't continuing professional development. It's clinical professional development,
Right.
because what tends to happen is people don't do the non-clinical bit. And as somebody who's going to be moving into owning a business, you need to understand what's sales, what's marketing, how to manage people, how do you motivate people, how do you create systems and processes and operations. So when you're not around as the owner in your business,
Yeah.
those processes and operations are clicking along and ticking, so you know you've got a good business. And I think that can come from looking at other people who own practices, other people who own businesses, non-dental businesses, and just
Okay.
obsess about what things do they do that mean they have a successful business, and just incorporate those into how you are and who you are. I'd encourage people very strongly to not try and mimic somebody else. So don't
Right.
look at somebody who you admire as a good business leader and say, well, I'm going to be like them. Yeah, I'm going to become the next Elon Musk,
Right.
because Elon Musk is already taken. He's that guy.
Yeah.
So you don't want to become that person. It
Yeah.
has to be a version of you. So whoever we are, with all our quirks and our little weird things about us, embrace it and become that person, because we spot authenticity a mile off. You know,
Okay.
you strike me as somebody who genuinely cares about dentistry and the business of dentistry. I can see it. I can see you're interested. It's authentic. If you were pretending just for the reason of this interview, I would spot it within minutes. And
I'm
people
with
look,
you.
people see this stuff. So if you're genuinely interested in only running a business and developing your style, layer it onto who you already are. Don't try and become somebody else. Kind of build out your own profile as opposed to trying to reinvent yourself.
I love that advice. I think that's a lot to take on there, and I think just that authenticity of it all really then actually helps you create your brand. That's great words of wisdom there.
Yeah.
So thank you very much for that. I think stepping with that then, and then moving into kind of what does it, we've kind of discussed, what it takes to become, the mold almost of somebody who might step into the world of ownership, right? But then obviously you hear all these stories that ownership's only for people that have been in the business for 10, 20 years. If you've got enough gray hair in your head, then that's the time to step into ownership. You've obviously
Yep, got
experienced.
some, got some.
I've got my beard's already coming through in white at the moment, so I'm getting there. What is it? What would you say in your experience? Because you've seen all sorts, I'm assuming, right? So is that just a folk's tale? Is it a case of there is maybe a minimum requirement in your opinion of how many years one should be practicing for?
No,
What's
I
your advice?
think it's kind of, if you're good enough, you're old enough.
Okay.
I don't like the idea that we have to wait to a certain age to do anything. There's some phenomenal examples of people who've started incredibly young and have done really well. People might be familiar with the business Gymshark. If anybody goes to a gym, they've probably worn Gymshark outfit. Ben Francis started that as a kind of a teenager from his mum's lounge. And then at the other end of the spectrum, you've got the guy that started KFC, the fried chicken chain. I don't think he started that till he was in his 60s. So you've got two extremes of when to do it, and I think it's when you feel comfortable.
Right.
Typically, and this is because of convention, and it also does relate to the financing side of things. People tend to start looking after they've been qualified for 3 or 4 years.
Right.
And the reason for that is that once you finish dental school, quite often people are like, I just need a bit of a rest, and I just
Yeah.
need to do the thing that I've learned to do. I'd just like to do some teeth for a year or two and just chill out. And I get that. The other side to that is the banks, if they're going to lend you the money to buy the practice, would like to see 3 years experience built up so that they can say, right, okay, so we now know what your grossing ability looks like. In that 3-year window, it's probably also giving you the opportunity to save some money, which would be your deposit, which is that 10% that you'd need. So just naturally, people tend to start looking to buy a practice in their kind of mid-late 20s, because
Right.
they've qualified from dental school, they've got that 3 years experience, they've saved some money, and that's when they start to look. And whilst I say if you're good enough, you're old enough, I think people do mature at different levels as well. And I think you do need a degree of maturity and life experience, because when you go into ownership of a business, you're making the decisions. So you could have people in the business who could be 15, 20, 25 years older than you, and you're going to have to manage those people. So you do need an element of life experience and be comfortable in that situation, which might not as naturally come for somebody who's just come out of dental school. And I think that's why we tend to see kind of late 20s being the sort of window that people start to look to buy.
Sounds good. I think that gives, as you said, enough time for them to obviously then save and then look towards that kind of 10% deposit mark. I mean, let's talk markets and kind of the figures that are going on. You've obviously given us a bit of an average price there, sort of 800k plus, right? There's this post-COVID shift. People are worried about, is the market right now to go into buying something as an independent practice owner? People are complaining that there's too many corporate entities out there buying out all of the practice up and down the country with My Dentist and obviously you've got now the what's the merger that happened recently,
Portman Dentex.
Portman Dentex. That's it.
Portman acquired Dentex, so they're now a combined entity. Yeah.
There you go. So you got these huge corporates, and they're kind of like basically everywhere now, it seems. is there still scope for the the Mr. Smith or the Dr. Smith, should I call him, that wants to just go out and buy something in the middle of, let's say, Kent, where I'm from?
Yeah.
Or is that
So
gone now?
so no, we sell 95% of what we sell is to a Dr. Smith.
Okay,
It's
brilliant.
that's the truth. So the corporates are acquiring practices, but they're still. I mean, I think it depends where you draw the line on corporates, because there's lots of smaller corporates. But I
Yeah.
still think we're looking at something like about 35% of the market. So the majority of the market is still independently owned.
Okay.
And also the corporates, they start to tap out at a certain size of practice. So
Oh,
ideally, they're looking for 3 surgeries minimum with potential, ideally 4, 5, 6 surgery practices. And most people who are looking to buy as an independent dentist are looking for a 2, 3, 4 surgery practice. So
right.
actually, they're fishing in slightly different ponds. They're not really looking for the same sort of thing. And as an independent buyer, I wouldn't be worried about competing against corporates. I
Okay.
genuinely believe that as an independent practice owner, as a principal working in your practice, you should be able to develop a culture and a franchise locally that should be more impressive than a corporate practice. A corporate practice which has a corporate back end infrastructure should not be as embedded in the community and feel as friendly and as culturally focused as a practice that has the business owner on site. And if it's a case where a corporate is beating you on those metrics, that's your fault,
Right,
because
I'm
they
with you.
shouldn't. They shouldn't. Also, when it comes down to paying for a practice, as an independent dentist, you shouldn't also be outbid by a corporate. So the
Ah,
corporates tend to work on a spreadsheet, and they
okay.
tend to work out what they believe the practice is worth, and that's what they'll pay for it. As an independent dentist, you may make the same assessment, but you might also make a slight emotional payment as well.
Right,
So
I'm
you
with you.
might pay just slightly over. So, you say you're from Kent.
Yes.
Let's say you had family in that area, or you had children going to school, or whatever it might be. You might look at it and be like, I tell you what, this practice is in such a perfect location. I'm prepared to pay a little bit more because to me, it's worth more.
Right.
And a corporate would not do that. A corporate has a spreadsheet, it's a business, it looks at its ROI on that site, and it makes a calculation, and that's what it's going to pay. So whilst there is a lot of talk about corporates, as an independent purchaser, I don't think you should be worried about that. I still think you can have an excellent business. Lots of people say, yeah, but it's not what it used to be. But
Right.
the world isn't what it used to be.
No.
And remember that we only get to see the world through our own eyes. So the
Mm,
people who are saying that have been in dentistry for 20, 30, 40 years. Oh, in the good old days. But the days are the days we're in now. The only thing that really matters is, does that business look good? Can you make money? What are interest rates? What are the future prospects? And what's
that's
the
it.
growth potential? That's it. Looking backwards and saying, "Oh, but it used to be," it's useful to have those conversations, but it's it's not going to help you buy practice.
No. I like that. I like that. I think that's a good way, kind of like looking at it. And I'm glad that you've given us some hope there, because obviously from my side of things, I would like read up on a couple of things here and there and think, nah, I'm never going to be able to buy a practice because
Mm,
corporate's just going to come in and swoop it out of my hands anyway. So it's nice to
yeah,
get a bit of perspective from somebody who's been there and done that to give me some hope. So another thing that kind of almost leads into perfectly is it better to buy a practice or is it better to start your own? Because that's a conversation all in itself, right? So, what would you say
yeah.
would be ideal in that situation as well?
So the choices are there. You can do both things. If we start with buying a practice,
Yeah.
so if you buy a practice, you pay goodwill, and
Okay.
that goodwill is effectively paying for what somebody has already established.
Can
So
I
they've
stop you
established,
there?
yeah.
Just for the sake of jargon, because even I, to this day, am getting confused. Can you please explain goodwill?
So goodwill is the value attributed to is intangible to start with. So you
Right.
can't touch it, you can't see it. It's the intangible value of a dental practice. It's the value created for a business
Okay.
that somebody else has created. So it's not your value. You're paying for what somebody else has created,
Right.
and that value is representative of the location of the dental practice, the fee income that the dental practice creates, the
Uh,
underlying profitability of that dental practice, the stability of the team, Is it a freehold? Is it a leasehold? What are the services that are being offered? Is it a general practice or is it a specialist practice? So there's about 35 metrics that go into the assessment, and then we calculate a goodwill value for that business, and that's effectively what you're paying for. So that's the goodwill. It's what somebody else has done in creating that business. But importantly, what it means is that the amount of money you're paying for is for an existing practice, an existing patient base, and underlying profitability. So all things being equal, what should happen is if you move into that business and you keep doing what's been done before, you should get similar results going forward. So that's what you're paying for. That's why goodwill values are high, because it's not as easy to set up a practice as it is to buy an existing practice, because you could argue that the hard work's been done and all you need to do is come in and kind of keep doing what's been done before.
Right.
So if we go to the other end of the spectrum, you can set up a squat dental practice, so from scratch. Bear in mind, in the UK, there's very little new NHS money. So if you're going to do that, it would be a pure private dental practice. So what you'd need to do is you'd need to find a location, you'd need to get planning permission, you'd need to then design and fit out that space to be suitable to your needs, 2, 3, 4 surgeries, whatever that is. You then need to start the marketing campaign to attract patients to come to your dental practice, treat them, and then you've got an established practice. The challenges that going down that model bring are, one, it's not as easy to arrange finance if you're setting up a squat dental practice. 2, it leans very heavily on your non-clinical skills. So now there's a lot of work around logistics and planning and operations and management and strategic marketing. Because if you buy an existing practice, that practice will have an existing patient base. So yes, you've got to market to them. But if you're starting from scratch, it's a squat practice, there are no patients. So your strategic marketing in recruiting patients is really important. And the last part, if you create a squat over by an existing practice, is that practice, it could take anywhere between 6 months and a year, 15 months to break even. And break even means it's going to be running at a cash deficit for a period of about a year. So within your financial planning, you need to budget in the fact that you'll have more expenses going out than revenue coming in. It will just take a while to build. And that's why goodwill values are high, and people are prepared to pay quite significant amounts for goodwill, existing dental practices, because somebody's done that hard work. However, if you're very entrepreneurial and business minded and you're able to create a squat, you don't have to pay for the goodwill. You effectively create your own goodwill. Setting up a dental practice in the UK at the moment from squat is anywhere from 350,000 upwards. So it doesn't mean that you get the practice for free. You still have to pay to get it set up, but you wouldn't have to pay what might be 7, 8, 900,000 for an existing practice. You get to do that from scratch. So that's the numbers side. The other reason to do it is some people just want to set the culture themselves. They've got their vision of what they want their practice to look like. Personally, I think going from being an associate straight into setting up a squat that's quite an ambitious move. Lots of people set up a squat once they've got an existing practice, and then they set up the second one they have is a squat, and they do it based on the experience of owning a practice. But there's no right or wrong. It's what you want to do, and I love the fact that you can do it if you want to do it, or you can buy an existing practice. Where it can work well is where you have associates that have done a very good job at building their own social media profile. What they're doing is they're actually already generating quite a lot of patients that come to them directly. And then what they do is, rather than directing those patients to the practice they're working at, they start to direct those patients to the practice, which is their practice. And that can give them a little bit of a kickstart in terms of attracting new patients to the practice.
Makes sense. I like it. And is sort of the world of squat practices and setting that all up, does that fit within your firm as well, or do you guys mainly just deal with sort of the buying and selling of already existing?
Yeah, so there's two other elements to what we do. So we do the valuation and selling, and that's the existing practices. And then
Okay.
there's two other elements within the group. So we have FJ Finance, and they help people finance the purchase of existing practices, and they also provide finance for squat practices as well. So we can certainly help people. If people are looking at that, and at the moment, the banks will lend you about 50% of the overall investment on a squat dental practice. And there are banks out there that will lend you up to £350,000 unsecured if you're looking to create a squat practice. So they're quite generous in terms of giving you the support that you need. And remember that if it's a squat practice, you can also have a significant amount of asset finance in there as well. And
Okay.
by asset finance, so the chair, the cabinetry, all the delivery unit, the compressors, all that side of things can be asset finance. So effectively what that means is they'll lend you the money against the equipment as opposed to you needing to provide security, which can work quite well.
I'm with
And
you.
then the last bit that we can help with is, as part of the group, we have FJ Media, which is a digital agency. So we can create video marketing content for dentists and their dental practices. And we also can create, post and engage social media content for people as well. So one
I'm
of the
with you.
things around social media that people love the idea of is it's a kind of a very quick, easy, and relatively cheap way to get to the market. Where people struggle is producing high quality content that they deliver consistently. So one of the things that we do is we have a service, and we've got a range of services from giving you templates and you can do it yourself, through to we can give you a creator pack where you receive a mobile phone, a gimbal, a light. You create some content, we edit and post that content for you, or we go into dental practices, we produce high quality content. All of our equipment is Netflix level. So we use very high quality content. We produce videos and then we post those videos for you. And in the early days on a squat, the marketing side is really important. Getting your marketing right early on is important. But even as somebody who's moving into the world of ownership, making sure that your digital marketing is consistent is a really important part of being successful.
Amazing stuff. I think we would definitely have your link in the description box for this video anyway. So I'm personally going to just dive into that and watch that as well afterwards, or see any examples. I think one of the questions I typically get asked, because I rave on about ownership all the time, even though I know nothing about it, is kind of like, if we were to go into the sort of the squat side of things, I think it's, you did mention something earlier as well, like, people have this
Mm.
entrepreneurial kind of vibe nowadays. Maybe it is because of TikTok and social media and all these big names out there in the market now. So I think people are more inclined towards the idea of a squat practice simply because they can put their name and their
Mm.
vibe into it, right? What would be kind of the main question I get, sorry to allude to that, was how many surgeries? So for anybody who doesn't know, surgeries are kind of like the rooms that
Yep.
the dentists are placed in the practice itself.
Yep.
How many surgeries would you say on average would be kind of the go-to for a decent squat? Because you don't want to go too little and you don't want to go with too many, like 10 surgeries, for example. So in your opinion, what would you say is a good number to start with?
So one of the things that we look at when we value practices is chair occupancy. And chair occupancy means within the surgery. So as you say, that's the individual room that has a dental chair in.
Yeah.
So the dental practice is the whole thing, and then the surgery is the room with the chair in. So we look at chair occupancy means how much through the working week is that chair used.
Right.
So if, say, you have a dental chair in a surgery and a practice is open 5 days a week, but that surgery is only used 3 days a week, that would be 60% chair occupancy because
Ah,
it's used 3 days a week. There's 2 days available, so 3 days across 5 is 60%. So that's kind of the number we look at. And where lots of practice owners really, really suffer is they don't look at their chair occupancy before they move on to adding in more surgeries. And
I'm
for
with you.
me, adding in new surgeries is expensive. So to fit out a surgery is probably 45 to 60 grand, something in that order.
Poof.
So I don't want to be spending another 45 to 60 grand kitting out a room until I know that the asset that I've already got is sweating hard. So I
Yeah.
want my existing surgeries up at like 90% chair occupancy before I do the next one.
Mm.
However, when you're set up a squat dental practice, the infrastructure goes in on day one. And by infrastructure, I'm talking really about plumbing and wiring. So the
Okay.
plumbing and wiring goes in on day one. So what I would suggest is you future-proof yourself with a big enough space for where you want your practice to go, but you don't fit it all out. So what that would look like in reality is you may take on some space that has the potential to be a 3 or 4 surgery practice, something like that. What you might only do is you might only fit out 1 surgery immediately, or 2, possibly,
Yep,
depending on how quick you think things can start, either 1 or 2 surgeries, but you have the plumbing and wiring in place for the other 2.
I'm with you.
So as your practice grows, you don't have a big infrastructure rearrangement. All you need to do is you basically just need to get in the chair, the cabinetry, the delivery unit, and possibly another x-ray, and off you go. You're off treating more patients.
I'm
But
with
I
you.
would encourage people to not get carried away and start adding in the extra surgery until your existing surgery is flat out. If you're looking at your appointment book and you're like, we are booked 2 or 3 weeks ahead and I just cannot get it down. I cannot get it down below 2 or 3 weeks because we're so busy. That to me is the time to start putting it in. What you don't want to do is you've had a busy week, you go, right, need another surgery. And you put that surgery in and then you find that things quieten down and you just spend 50, 60 grand on a room that you don't need. So
I'm with you.
I would build the infrastructure so you're ready, but don't fit it out too early. Just hold back and make sure the surgeries are really working at an optimum level before you put that next one in.
Perfect stuff. Perfect stuff. I remember I sent you a message before this, and when we were arranging everything, and I said, one of the things I'd like to cover was jargon, because when people are kind of looking online and they're seeing like surgeries and EBITDAs and gross and net, etc., goodwill, for example, it kind of just flies over our head, right? So can we take a moment to almost break that down? Because I think
Yeah,
there's a
sure.
few websites that I've looked at. I mean, people can do it themselves. They can Google buy dental clinic or dental practice in the UK, and you'll find like almost like a rightmove.com version for dental practices. Within that, you get all these figures. I mean, there's terms such as freehold versus leasehold, and as I say, earnings before interest and tax, yada yada yada. But it means nothing to us. So can we do a whistle stop tour real quick, maybe, and you just explain what everything means? Because I'm very open and honest when it comes to this, but I'm a financially driven individual. I'm old in years, but young in the game in dentistry. So for me, I'm kind of trying to play catch up with maybe my younger colleagues. So when I look at kind of that finance side of things, it does excite me somewhat. So the question I have for you is, essentially break that down, and then let's then maybe just hone in for maybe the final bit of this as to how much can I, Naveed, in the future potentially make, and we'll give you like a case scenario that maybe we can like break it down and find out what potentially could be my bottom line. So
Yeah,
I'll
sure.
hand over to you for the jargon bit first.
So for the jargon bit, let's just talk about accounts and valuations. That would be good. So
Okay.
turnover. Turnover is the income that comes into the business. So turnover, gross, fee income, annual turnover, gross fees, all mean the same thing.
Okay.
So listen back to this afterwards and listen to it slowly and listen to those. They all mean the same thing. So that's income. So on a set of accounts, you have one number at the top and that's the income. Below that, everything else is an expense.
Aha.
When you take the expenses away from the income, the turnover, whatever that you want to call that top number, when you take that away, that's the net profit. The net profit is the money in the business after the expenses that you will pay tax on. That net
Okay.
profit is also the money that you earn as a dentist. So your earnings, and we'll keep it really simple because you can operate in 2 different structures. So you can operate as a sole trader, which means the accounts are just in your name. So that's just Dr. Naveed trading as Apple Green Dental Practice. Or you could be Apple Green Dental Practice Limited,
Right.
and you can pay yourself in different ways. So for the purpose of now, we won't get drawn into different operating structures because you can kind of go down a rabbit hole.
Yeah.
But let's just assume that you're in a situation where the net profit is the money that's available to you to earn from that dental practice.
Makes
Okay,
sense.
so that's what you got from there. That net profit is a bit that will appear on your accounts.
Right.
What we look at when we value dental practices is we look at that net profit and there's like a 2-stage process. So the first stage is to get to an EBITDA number.
Right.
And EBITDA gets bounded about a lot, and everybody goes, "Oh yeah, EBITDA, very important EBITDA." there aren't many people that truly understand what EBITDA is. Everybody says it, and we all nod sagely like it's a really important number. It's reasonably simple. The problem that you have and where it gets complicated is the E means earnings.
Right.
The earnings is actually the net profit. But
Okay.
in the EBITDA calculation, it's not called net profit, it's called earnings, because the EBITDA calculation was designed by the city to come up with a benchmark so that it could compare companies to companies across different sectors. And it's filtered its way into dentistry. Where it doesn't fit perfectly in dentistry is that the majority of dental practices that are owned by independent dentists aren't truly run as businesses. They're run partly as lifestyle businesses. So some of the costs that are incurred in the business don't truly sit within the efficient operating of a dental practice, but they're perfectly allowable costs. So an EBITDA calculation doesn't truly reflect the underlying profit. So that's why EBITDA isn't the right calculation when you're assessing the value of a dental practice. But anyway, so back to EBITDA. So the E is the earnings, which is actually the net profit. The B stands for before. So what we're now saying is before means we're going to start adding things back to the earnings. The I is interest. So if there's any bank or loan interest in those expenses in the profit and loss account, they get added back. The T is tax. So if there's been any tax paid, again, they get added back. The D is depreciation. And depreciation is a profit and loss item. It's not a cash item, but it's an allowable deduction for the reducing value of assets in your business. So if there's equipment, fixtures and fittings, that will be an allowable deduction. So what you're saying is, what's the life of that equipment? And you might say, well, I think that equipment has a life of 5 years. So the depreciation would be the reducing value of that equipment at 20% a year over its useful life, which is 5 years. And that appears in your accounts. And then the last item is A, amortization, which again is another form of depreciation, but it's for intangible assets. And typically that's goodwill. So you'd have that in there as well. So earnings is net profit. Before you then add interest, tax, depreciation and amortization. That will give you your EBITDA number. So that's the number that everybody talks about and everybody assesses about. However, EBITDA only tells half the story. So what you really need to do is you need to get to a reconstituted net profit figure, or fair maintainable trade, or adjusted net profit. They're all the same thing. And what we do is we look at in the business, are there other costs incurred in the business that don't necessarily sit in that business or need to? So for example, we know that in a given year, you have to do CPD, so you're going to attend courses. And the average dentist might spend £2,500 a year attending courses. However, if you as a dentist chose to attend a course in Toronto and then another course in New York, and then you decided to go to Dubai for another course, I would argue that is that necessary for the efficient running of a general dental practice in Milton Keynes? It may or may not be. So what I would do is I might make an adjustment for the courses to get to a reasonable level. Likewise, you might put your motor vehicle through your business, which is an allowable thing to do. You may incur some domestic expenses, which end up going through the business. So what we need to do is we need to try and get to that level of understanding. And then the last part is some practices are very heavily led by the principal, and the principal is the term for somebody who owns a dental practice, or they're associate led. And associate led means they're associates who work in the practice and produce a dentistry the principal doesn't. So what we need to do is we need to look at those numbers and say, if a dentist worked in here on a full-time basis, what adjustments do we need to make for that associate? So those are some of the big terms. You also mentioned freehold and leasehold as well.
Yes.
Really straightforward. So a dental practice has to operate from premises of some sort or other. If it's operating from premises which the person who owns the business also owns the property, then that will be a freehold property because they own the property. That's a freehold. If they operate their dental practice from a building which somebody else owns, they've got a lease, so that's leasehold. So freehold, you own the property as well as the dental practice. leasehold, you only own the dental practice and somebody else owns a property. Both are perfectly viable ways of owning and running a dental practice. You
Okay.
do not have to own the premises to run a dental practice.
That is super interesting stuff. And I'm not going to get into so the questions that are popping into my head right now. Otherwise, we're going to be here forever. But going back to this, the EBITDA thing, and obviously you said putting the figures back in,
Yeah.
calculating what the real worth of it is, etc. If we were looking at EBITDA, because this is usually a figure we can find online quite easy when it comes to dental practices, what would you say that is in terms of a percentage representation of the actual final figure for, let's say that the owner of that business, if I was looking at that and I was thinking of acquiring that business and I wanted to have an idea in my head as to, that looks like this person's EBITDA is 300K, right? What should that really look like at the end of the day? Let's just call it final profit or whatever it might be. I don't know what the term is. What would that actually look like roughly in terms of percentages?
So as a percentage, if it's a general practice, and we'll stick to general, not specialist practices, because specialist practices, they tend to have higher profit but lower value. So if we just talk about a general dental practice, on the accounts, I would expect the profit to look like something between 22 and 25%, possibly a little bit more as a percentage of turnover. So remember, we've got turnover, gross fees, income, gross income, all those lots of phrases that mean the same thing. So the profit as a percentage of that turnover, around about 25, it could be 25, 26%. Nice. However, once we make the adjustments, so this is the reconstituted net profit, the fair maintainable trade number. That number will most likely get to something like 35 to 36%. And the difference are those extra costs that we're able to add back. The difference on specialist practices, specialist practices tend to produce much higher fees and much higher profitability. So they could be up to 50% of turnover. So they're much more profitable. However, when it comes to selling, the audience isn't as large. And because it's a willing buyer, willing seller, you might have a willing seller, but there aren't that many willing buyers. It means the value of those practices isn't as high. So you should be trying to get to an adjusted profit of about 35%. Anything within a couple of percent either side of 35% is a reasonably good performing business. Something to bear in mind though is if it's below that number, if you believe you can make changes to improve that percentage, that might be a gem of a practice for you to buy. Because sometimes you have practices that just aren't particularly efficiently run, and you might be able to come in and change how that practice runs and improve the profitability of it. And if you can do that, then you would add value to that business.
I like it. And that's kind of, again, brings that entrepreneurial side back up and, allows you to possibly put your spin on something. So let's do a quick case study then. So let's imagine I'm there a few years in and, somehow, let's hope, fingers crossed, I'm earning, let's say 120, right? As a private dentist working for somebody. Is it worthwhile for somebody on an income as such to then want to go into the world of ownership? Is there scope for them to be earning a lot more than that, or is it pretty much the same? What would you say to that?
So to start with, if you were earning 120 as an associate, in my world, that means you're grossing the dental fees you're generating to earn 120 is probably something like 250 to 270,000 pounds of dentistry, something in that order. So for me, you've pre-qualified yourself as somebody who is likely to do okay from a clinical point of view, owning a dental practice, because I make an assumption that a principal should be producing about 300 to 350,000 pounds worth of dentistry. So that number is a good number to start with. When you take over a business that turns over, say, 600,000 pounds, which is that's a reasonable sized dental practice. If we go back to the 25%, if it's turning over 600,000 pounds, then that's going to produce a profit of about 150,000 pounds. So if you're earning 120,000 pounds as an associate at the moment, you would end up with a business that produces a profit of 150,000 pounds. So in real terms, in the early days, you probably won't earn much more money owning a practice as opposed to as an associate. And believe me, as a multiple business owner, you get stress that comes with it as well. Like, it's not easy. However, that's day one. That is day one. And the idea of buying a practice, like I said at the very beginning, is work out why you want to own a business and where it takes you. I see people who own dental practice who are making, individual practice owners making 5, 6, 7, 800,000 pound a year. So the financial rewards are there, but it's not something that you flick a switch and you go from earning 120 as an associate to earning £500,000 a year. It takes time. You have to grow your business. You have to grow your business and work at it. But equally, there are no guarantees. There's no rule book that says because you buy a practice over the next 10 years, I'm going to double, treble, quadruple my earnings. It doesn't work like that. But overwhelmingly, the evidence is that you will earn more money as a practice owner. But also it does other things for you as well. And it's quite easy just to focus on the what you earn. But it also means that at the moment as an associate, when you take a holiday and you put your handpiece down, you're not earning any money.
True.
When you own a dental practice, you put your handpiece down and go on holiday, your practice isn't earning at the same rate because you as a principal delivering dentistry, you don't incur an associate cost when you're delivering the dentistry yourself because you're the dentist. So when you go on holiday, your practice is purely dependent on associates and hygienists and therapists. So it's not as profitable, but it is still profitable.
Yeah.
So you can take a holiday knowing that you still have a business that's making money. So there's a significant difference there. Equally, if you wanted to explore avenues away from dentistry, which was going to take up some of your time, it might create the freedom and the time to do that because, again, you've got a business that is producing. It won't be as profitable, but it will be producing profit. But all I'd say to people is just don't assume that this is going to happen overnight. Yeah. It might be a 2, 3, 5 year process. But the people I see that own dental practices, they tend to earn more money than people that work as associates on an average case basis. There are some phenomenal performing associates that produce. I know one particular associate works in London, works 3 days a week. He will take home this year £350,000. But that is an exceptional individual.
Yeah.
And we really are talking about an outlier. That's not normal case, but it does highlight that you can still earn and do incredibly well as an associate. Equally, I know practice owners who are earning £100,000 a year and they find it really hard. But if we just take the averages and the norms, you would tend to do better as a practice owner. And also, you remember you've got an asset to sell as well. At the end of the day, if you paid £800,000-900,000 for your business, if you look after that business well and you grow it, when you come to sell that business, it should be over £1 million. So there's that aspect to it as well.
Amazing stuff. I think I could spend all day here with you, but I'm thinking now, obviously we're conscious of time as well. We should definitely catch up for another episode if that's okay with you, Andy. At some point,
love to. I mean, for my part, genuinely, I think it's such a big deal buying a business, getting into business ownership, and the more we can help share messages about this topic to inform people, to help them make a better decision, has to be a good thing to do. And I know that in the early days of dentistry in a dental school, this topic doesn't really get covered much. So I think you're doing a great job getting content like this in front of people.
No, it means a lot to hear that from you. I think in the future, hopefully we can discuss things such as the pros and the cons of actual. I lost you there for a second. You just went. Here you go. I was saying, the pros and the cons of obviously having the practice to yourself. The recruitment side of it, the costs involved, the darker days, selling. We haven't discussed selling. We haven't discussed scaling up and leveling up and getting more than one practice. So we'll hopefully leave that for another one.
Yeah.
Just in the meantime, hopefully let's hope so. I think just to kind of wrap it up, and I'll leave the floor to you on this one. How can you guys help? Because we haven't really spoken about the firm and kind of what you guys do specifically. So for those maybe that are maybe in their final year, or maybe they just recently graduated, or they're looking to actually get on that property ladder within dentistry, why you guys and how can you help them to attain their dreams?
I think there's probably a few things. I'd encourage, if people are genuinely interested about getting into ownership, they should register with us at Frank Taylor Associates, so they receive sales prospectus. It's free. It doesn't cost you anything. You can register for free. But what it means is you'll start to see prospectus come into your inbox and you'll look at them. And just by looking at them, you'll start to understand some of the language you've been using today. It will start to make sense and it will start to join up. And you'll look at profit and loss statements and reconstituted net profit, and these words that just sound random, when you start looking at a prospectus, it will start to make sense. So I encourage people to register soon, and just even if they're not looking to buy in the next year or 2 or 3 years, it will just start to get their mind thinking in a different way, which would be a good thing to do. I'd love to connect with people through Instagram or LinkedIn. I share quite a lot of information and content around buying a practice, selling a practice, how to improve a practice. We also run different courses, and one's been very popular this year. We do a buyer's masterclass, which is a 1-day course. People come down, we do in either London or Birmingham, and it's 1 day where we go kind of step by step through all the things you need to do to buy a dental practice, right from deciding whether you want one, how to assess a prospectus, if you're viewing a practice, what that looks like, how to arrange finance, how to find your own leadership style. Because I just think that the more pre-work you can do, the better. And if through that process you decide that it's not for you and you don't want to buy a practice, don't ever feel that in some way you kind of, not achieved all the things that you could have. Like I say, like going back to the very beginning, you can still be a phenomenal associate and have a massive contribution in dentistry without needing to own a dental practice. But I'd encourage people just to register. That's it. It doesn't cost anything. Just register and start receiving details. And that will open your eyes to some of the language and the jargon and the setup of practices. That would be a really good start point.
I think I'll make sure that I do that. And as I said, I'll leave all of the links in the description box. I'll get my friends here at uni to do the same thing. And again, echo what you said there and encourage everybody who's listening to follow suit and maybe get in on this world of practice ownership and understanding the jargon that goes behind it. And I just want to say thank you so much, my friend, for coming on and sharing a wealth of info. The insight's been ridiculously amazing. And I think anybody listening is definitely going to take a lot from it. Hopefully, we'll do a part 2 to this if time permits. I know you're a busy man. And yeah, no, for anybody that's listening and watching, I hope you've taken away something from this, as I can assure you I've taken away a lot. So Andy, once again, thank you so much for joining us today.
Not at all. Thanks for the invite. Cheers, everybody.
Absolute pleasure. Thanks, guys, and I'll see you on the next one. Bye.
Cheers, Stella.